Family photo discovered, and the archivists freeze when they zoom in on the clock. The October afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the quiet Massachusetts Historical Archive, filling the room with a soft golden glow Sarah had always loved. She had worked there for 12 years, cataloging donations and organizing documents most people dismissed as just old paper. To Sarah, every item was a doorway into real lives that deserved to be remembered. That Tuesday, a worn cardboard box arrived with a short note attached. "Family belongings. We don't have space to keep them. Maybe someone will be interested." It was signed only with the initials RK. Sarah opened the box gently. Inside were yellowed letters, a small prayer book with loose pages, a few property papers, and at the bottom, wrapped in thin cloth, an envelope holding old photographs. The first image instantly caught her eye. It was a family photograph from 1889, taken in front of a modest wooden house. 7 people stood and sat stiffly for the camera. A middle-aged man sat at the center, a woman beside him, 3 children, and 2 young adults standing behind. All wore their best clothes, their faces serious, as smiling in photographs was still uncommon then. Sarah lifted her magnifying glass and studied the details. The image quality was surprisingly sharp for its age. She could see the grain of the wooden boards, the small buttons on the dresses, even the scuffed toes of the man's shoes. That was when she noticed it. Through the window behind the family, partly visible inside the house, hung a wall clock. Sarah adjusted the photograph under the light, and her pulse quickened. The clock looked nothing like any piece from that era she had ever seen. The wood was uneven, light and dark sections joined without any clear pattern. The face seemed pieced together from parts that did not belong to the same object. Even in black and white, it was obvious this was not a store-bought clock. It was handmade, improvised, almost experimental. Sarah turned the photograph over. Written on the back in faint ink were the words, "Family, September 1889, the day the clock finally rang." She frowned. Why would a working clock be important enough to mark with a formal family photograph? And why would such a strange, homemade object be placed so clearly in the background of a simple home? The clock looked broken, assembled from scraps, yet the note spoke of success, not failure. Something didn't make sense. She studied the family again. The man in the center had gentle eyes but a face worn by hardship. His posture was formal, a little stiff. The woman beside him sat with her hands folded, her expression calm but unreadable. The children looked uneasy, as if they had been ordered not to move for too long. Then Sarah noticed the man's hands. They rested on his knees, but something felt wrong. His right hand curled slightly at an unnatural angle. His left lay flat, but the fingers looked rigid, almost locked in place. A chill moved down Sarah's spine. She had seen enough historical records to recognize the signs. These were not just old hands, they were injured hands. She knew then that this discovery mattered. Sarah spent the rest of the afternoon examining the other items from the box. The letters were fragile, some nearly impossible to read, but she managed to make out names: Thomas, Rebecca, and their children, James, William, and Alice. The surname matched a property deed for a small farm on the outskirts of town. She scanned the photograph in high resolution and zoomed in on the clock. The details became clearer. The wooden frame used at least 4 different types of wood. The numbers on the face were hand-painted and slightly uneven. The pendulum was thin, likely adapted from another object. What fascinated Sarah most was the accuracy. The clock hands pointed exactly to 3 in the afternoon, and the shadows at the doorway of the house matched that time. This improvised clock, built from scraps, actually worked. She opened the archive database and searched for the family. Birth records appeared, a marriage certificate dated 1867, land purchase papers. Thomas was 38 years old in 1889 and worked as a farmer, growing corn and vegetables, but something stood out. Between 1863 and 1865, there were no records of him in the area. Sarah knew what that usually meant: the Civil War. She searched military records. After nearly an hour, she found him. Thomas had enlisted in 1863 at just 17 years old in the 20th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment. He served until 1865. As Sarah read the full record, her stomach tightened. Wounded in combat, April 1865. Hand injuries. Honorably discharged. She returned to the photograph and zoomed in on Thomas again. Now the signs were unmistakable. His hands told the story clearly. Thomas had come back from the war with damaged hands, and yet he had built that clock. Sarah felt a shiver. This photograph wasn't just a family memory, it was proof of something remarkable. A man who lost the use of his hands had created a precise working mechanism. She needed to know how. The archive had grown quiet. Most of her co-workers had gone home. Sarah spread more documents across her desk. Property tax records showed financial struggle after the war. Missed payments, requested delays, small debts carefully recorded. A farmer who could barely use his hands, a family barely surviving. And still there was the clock. Complex, functional, unbelievable. The next morning, Sarah searched for detailed medical records. Military medical files were thorough but difficult to read. After hours of careful searching, she found it. Private Thomas. Shrapnel wounds to right and left hands. 3 fingers of the right hand lost partial mobility. Left hand suffer. D tendon damage, limited movement. Prognosis, unable to perform fine manual work or hold small tools with precision. Unable to perform fine manual work. Sarah read it again and looked back at the clock image. Then she turned to the letters. Most were between Rebecca and her sister in Boston, discussing daily life, sick children, harsh winters, poor harvests. One letter dated November 1865 stood out. Thomas returned last week, Rebecca wrote. He is not the same man who left. The doctors say his hands will never fully heal. He tries to work the fields, but I see the pain in his face. He drops tools. Yesterday, he could not hold the horse reins properly. He says nothing, but I know he feels he has failed us. I tell him that he is alive, and that should be enough, but I see defeat in his eyes. Sarah swallowed hard. Another letter from March 1866 was even more painful. Thomas barely speaks now. He sits by the window for hours. The children ask why their father does not play with them anymore. James gave him a broken toy to fix, hoping it would cheer him. Thomas tried to hold the pieces, then walked away. I found him later in the barn with his head in his hands. Sarah paused, letting the weight of it sink in. A young man, barely 20, returned from war, unable to work, unable to provide, unable even to fix a child's toy. She kept reading. There was a gap in letters for several months. Rebecca later explained, "Forgive my silence. These have been dark months." Then the tone chang. Ed. A letter from August 1866 read, "Something strange happened yesterday. Our neighbor, Mr. Harrison, brought over a broken pocket watch. He said he only wanted company. They sat together for an hour. Thomas studied the watch, and for the first time in months, I saw focus instead of sadness. After Mr. Harrison left, Thomas asked me for an old spoon and some wire. I did not understand, but I gave them to him. He has been working on something ever since. He is trying again." Sarah leaned back. This was the turning point. She searched for Mr. Harrison in town records. Benjamin Harrison lived on the neighboring property, a widower and former carpenter. Town notes described him as a man who helped others often. One meeting record from 1867 mentioned Harrison donating tools to a veterans' aid group, helping injured soldiers learn new skills. Sarah requested Harrison's diary, stored in the archive. When it arrived, she carefully turned the pages until she reached 1866. His handwriting was steady and clear. August 12, 1866. Visited young Thomas today. The war broke more than his hands. A man needs purpose. Brought my broken watch so he could remember how it feels to solve a problem. August 15, 1866. Thomas asked about watch mechanisms today. First time he has spoken much. Explained how gears depend on one another. I saw something return to his eyes. September 3, 1866. Thomas showed me a tool he made, a handle shaped for his grip, spoon hammered flat into a wedge. Rough but useful. He said if he cannot use tools made for normal hands, he will make tools for his own. This is how healing begins. Sarah felt tears rise. The diary continued. Harrison brought broken objects not to repair but to study. Lamps, hinges, music boxes. October 20th, 1866. Thomas turned his barn into a workshop. Rebecca worries, but I see purpose. He dismantled a door lock today using his own tools. A small victory, but still a victory. Then came the entry that explained everything. November 30th, 1866. I challenged Thomas to build something precise, something difficult, something impossible. I told him to build a clock. Sarah read it again. Harrison believed Thomas needed an impossible task. Rebecca's letters showed fear at first, then hope. Thomas worked until his hands bled. He made tools for his limitations. He changed. Looking again at the clock in the photo, Sarah finally understood. The mismatched wood, the uneven numbers, the strange design. It was not poor work. It was survival, adaptation, triumph. The clock marked 3 in the afternoon. The day it finally rang, she ignored it. This story had taken over her thoughts completely. As Sarah searched deeper through the records, she realized that Thomas's project had not stayed private for long. The small farming town of Concord had noticed. She found short mentions in a local church newsletter from 1868. We pray for Brother Thomas in his efforts. His determination is an inspiration to all who face hardship. A ledger fro. The general store showed something even clearer. Beginning in early 1868, townspeople had made small purchases marked especially for Thomas's work. Fine wire, a small pane of glass, oil meant for delicate mechanisms. One entry made Sarah pause. March 15, 1868. Mrs. Patterson, widow, purchased 1 brass gear, salvage, payment 3 eggs. Noted for Thomas, my late husband would want his tools to serve a good purpose. The community was not just watching Thomas struggle, they were quietly helping. Sarah found a letter from Reverend Samuel to the diocese dated July 1868. I must report an unusual yet inspiring development in our parish. One of our veterans, badly wounded in the war, has taken on the task of building a timepiece despite his injuries. The project has become a shared effort. Parish members donate materials, others visit to offer encouragement. I believe we are seeing something meaningful, a man rebuilding not only a clock but his sense of value. And in helping him, our community is healing its own war wounds. This gave the story a depth Sarah had not fully understood before. The Civil War had ended only 3 years before Thomas began his work. Every family in Concord had been affected. Sons lost, fathers injured, brothers who never returned. Thomas's impossible project had become a symbol for all of them. If he could create something beautiful from broken parts, maybe they could believe in healing too. Sarah found notes about informal gatherings at Tom. As his barn. A farmer's journal mentioned, stopped by Thomas's workshop today. 5 other men were there, watching him work. No one talked much. No need. We all knew what we were seeing. Proof the war didn't take everything from us. Rebecca's letters showed the same change. Our home has become a place where people gather. Men come by saying they want to see the clock, but I think they come to see Thomas, to see a man who refuses to give up. Yesterday, a young veteran named Samuel visited. He lost his leg at Petersburg. He and Thomas barely spoke, but Samuel stayed 2 hours just watching him work with those adapted tools. When he left, he stood a little straighter. Sarah understood now that this was bigger than one man's victory. It was about shared healing, a whole community finding hope through one person's refusal to accept defeat. The 1889 photograph made more sense. It was not just about a clock finally working. It was about what that clock represented. 21 years of effort, support, and proof that broken things could be made whole again. But one question remained. Why 1889? Thomas had begun the clock in 1866. What had taken so long? Sarah found the answer in letters between Rebecca and her sister that stretched across decades. The clock did not take 23 years to build. It took 23 years to perfect. April 1869. Thomas finished the clock last week. It runs nearly 6 hours before stopping. He says that is not enough. He wants it to keep exact time and ring on the hour. I tell him it is already a miracle, but he says if it does not work properly, it means nothing. Thomas's need for perfection appeared again and again. Harrison's diary confirmed it. May 1869. The clock works, but Thomas refuses to call it finished. He is right. It loses 3 minutes a day. For most men, that would be fine. For Thomas, it is failure. He has taken it apart again. The years passed in the records. Sarah watched Thomas's life unfold piece by piece. His children grew older. The farm became stable again. He gained a reputation as a man who could fix what others gave up on, always using his altered tools and unusual methods. But the clock never left his mind. November 1873. 7 years now. The clock runs for days but still loses time. Thomas has rebuilt the escapement 4 times. Each version is better, but perfection stays out of reach. I wonder if he will ever be satisfied. Rebecca's letters showed patience mixed with worry. Harrison's later entries showed understanding. January 1875. Thomas finally explained why the clock matters so much. He said, "The war took my hands. If I build a clock that almost works, then the war still wins. I need to prove that what I lost does not define what I can still do." I understand him now. This was never about time. It was about taking himself back. Sarah also found records showing Thomas teaching others. By the 1880s, wounded veterans came to learn his methods. A newspaper clipping from 1882 read, "Lo, Cal Farmer Thomas, despite war injuries, has helped many veterans learn to work with modified tools. His workshop has become an informal school for men learning to live with lasting injuries." The photograph made even more sense now. The 2 young adults in it were James and William, Thomas's oldest sons. They had grown up watching their father work on that clock, learning his adapted techniques along the way. But why did the clock finally succeed in 1889? Sarah found the answer in a letter from William to his uncle, dated August 1889. "Father's hands have worsened. The old injuries and years of work have taken their toll. His fingers barely move now. Last month he told James and me he could not finish the clock alone anymore. Now we work together each evening. Father designs and directs. We carry out the work under his guidance. It is the 3 of us now, finishing what he began." Sarah felt the weight of that truth. Thomas had not lowered his standards. He had adapted once more, accepting help and teaching his sons to complete what his hands could no longer do. She found a final account in a journal kept by James. September 8, 1889. "Today may be the day. Father inspected every gear and spring one last time. His hands shake now from age and old wounds. William and I made the final adjustments under his instruction. Father insisted on winding it himself. It took nearly 10 minutes. We watched as he set the pendulum in motion. The next line was underlined 3 times. It bah! Orcs." The entry continued. "The clock has been running 6 hours. Father sits watching it, tears on his face. He will not leave the workshop. Mother brought food, but he barely touched it. He only watches the pendulum swing." William asked him how he felt. Father said, "I feel whole again." Sarah had to stop and steady herself. The emotion in those words crossed the years with full force. Later entries showed careful testing. September 10th, clock still perfect. September 15th, 1 full week. Father finally smiled. He said, "It is truly done." Mother cried. We all did. September 20th, Father requested a family photograph. He wants the clock visible to record this moment for everyone who helped over the years. He insists Mr. Harrison be mentioned. Sarah returned to the photograph. She now saw it clearly. This was not a simple portrait. It was a victory. Thomas at the center, damaged hands visible, but no longer symbols of defeat. Rebecca beside him, steady and strong. Their children, shaped by his example. And through the window, carefully placed, the clock that should never have existed. The photographer's logbook confirmed it. Family portrait, Thomas family. Special request to position family so interior clock visible. Unusual request. Client insisted. Extended session to capture clock clearly. The note on the back of the photo made perfect sense now. The day the clock finally rang. Not just worked, but rang. Thomas had added a bell to mark the hours. Sarah found one last letter. Harrison to Thomas, written days after the photograph. Harrison died a week later. "My dear Thomas, I never truly believed you would finish it. I thought it would occupy you for a year or 2, but you proved me wrong. You did not build a clock. You built proof that the human spirit cannot be broken by circumstance. That clock will outlive us both. Thank you for teaching an old carpenter that he still had something to learn." Sarah spent the next week tracing the family's later years. Thomas died in 1904, Rebecca in 1908. James inherit Ed the farm. But the clock's fate surprised her most. A 1905 article explained it. Thomas left instructions in his will. The clock was to be donated to the town hall so that others who felt broken could see it and know they were not. After several calls, Sarah reached the town hall. 3 days later, she received confirmation. They had found the clock in basement storage, forgotten for decades. She went that afternoon. Wrapped in cloth on a high shelf was the clock from the photograph. When she wound it, the mechanism resisted, then slowly gave way. They waited. Nothing. Then a sound. Tick, tick, tick. The pendulum began to move. It still worked. 2 months later, the archive opened a permanent exhibition. The clock stood at the center, preserved but alive, its steady tick filling the room. Visitors left messages of hope and gratitude. Veterans came, students came. People who felt broken came and left believing they were not. Sarah often stayed late, listening to the clock in the quiet building. She no longer saw just a photograph from 1889. She saw proof that determination, supported by community, could outlast time itself.